Hello, my name is Daniel Schoonmaker. I am the Executive Director of West Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, and I am pleased to welcome you to our presentation today. For those that are not familiar with the organization, the forum is a collaboration of business institutions dedicated to promoting sustainable business practices with a focus on climate leadership, social justice, circular economy, and community resilience. This is the sixth in our series of online discussions of how the coronavirus pandemic is impacting sustainability and sustainable business, and the second in our two-part Earth Week dialogues. Upcoming webinars in series includes next week's program, Promoting Employee Wellness and Community Sustainability Through Food Systems Among COVID-19 and Beyond, featuring Kate Lito of Experience Grand Rapids, Lisa Oliver King of Our Kitchen Table, and Garrett Ziegler of Michigan State University. Then the following week, we'll have a to be finalized date for resiliency of farms during and after COVID-19 in the Lakeshore, featuring Lori Lundell of Lundell Farms, Michaela Roden of McLaughlin Grows Urban Farm, and Miranda Shreve of Michigan's Farmers Market Association. And then finally, as we start thinking about Earth Week, Earth Month, and Earth Day, which has been for the most part rescheduled in our normal programming, I'd like to highlight our save the date for our largest event of the year, which at this moment we are hopeful will still happen as a live event. Our 7th annual Trip Bottom Line Bash, which will be highlighting Earth Day 50.5 on Wednesday, October 14th at the High Five in Grand Rapids. So please put that on your calendars today. Videos of today's program and the prior sessions are available on demand at no cost. You'll find a link to those in the chat shortly that you may like to bookmark. You also receive a link to those of the feedback survey and any additional notes that come out of today's program shortly after we wrap up this afternoon. This series and all of our programs are primarily funded through membership donations. If you are not yet a member of our organization, I'd encourage you to become one. There has never been a better time to do so, or realistically a greater need. To that effect, I'd like to recognize our new corporate member this week, Michigan State University. Thank you so much for your support and your growing participation in our organization. You may also be interested in learning about our various working groups, including our Climate Leadership Roundtable on specific to our discussion today, our Equity and Sustainability Working Group, and our new Prosperous Economy Working Group, all of which have meetings scheduled in the next few weeks here. Applications are also being accepted for our board of directors until April 28th next week. If you have an interest, please check out our website to learn more about that. And finally, one last housekeeping item. If you are a participant in our organization or would like to be and have been furloughed in the coming weeks, please do reach out to us and let us know so we can take steps to keep you involved. You are certainly encouraged and welcome to do so, and we'd love to help you through that if we can. Now for today's program, can COVID-19 drive climate leadership? Please welcome our panelists for the day. Beth Givens, Executive Director of the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. Mark LaCroix, Executive Vice President of the Americas for Natural Capital Partners, and a inductee of the Sustainable Business Forum's Sustainable Business Hall of Fame. And John Kinch, Executive Director for Michigan Energy Options. Thank you all for joining us today. Please note, please note for our attendees that you can share thoughts with our panelists or all of our attendees through the chat function. You can also ask questions through the Q&A field, and we'll be getting through those later in the call. Before we get underway, would you mind introducing yourselves and what brings you to our roundtable today? Mark, would you like to get us underway with that?
Sure. Thanks, Dan, and thanks for putting together this great series. I've had a chance to make a few of them and have really enjoyed it. to echo one of the other participants, I came because you invited me, Dan, and you know, I always listen to what you say. And no, I'm here. You know, our company is been working in the climate and energy space for over 20 years. Real pioneer in the voluntary market. So we work primarily with corporates. We've worked 400, almost 500 projects around the world in sustainable infrastructure, health and social impact, and natural climate solutions. So we work with a lot of companies on carbon neutrality. We manage the Carbon Neutral Protocol, which is the world's leading frameworks for claims of carbon neutrality. So yeah, very obviously this is core to our business model. So pleased to be here.
Great. And as you said, Dan, I am Beth Gibbons. I'm the Executive Director at the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. Our work is dedicated to connecting and supporting people who do climate adaptation work across the country, and through those connections, building innovation and excellence in the field of adaptation and resilience. I'm really glad to be here today, and I really appreciate just so folks know, the questions you sent us in advance, it's not totally off the cuff, because I think the conversation about where is climate leadership is really important. It was important in February, and it will be important in May. And the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic is having on the climate community is important to talk about. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation about what lessons we can start to learn. And I'll probably push back on some things about the pace at which we want answers to things that are still just so uncertain. And I think there's a certain ability for climate adaptation and resilience professionals to really thrive in uncertainty and still take action. And so I'm looking forward to talking about that and the way that we can share those lessons with a broader community.
John, I think you should be appearing on it via just audio.
Okay,
can you say something? I
can you hear
can.
me?
You're gonna appear as on the screen as Daniel Schoonmaker, as an FYI,
Okay.
because I had to send you the link that I registered.
Once I do my introduction, should I pop off and then try that new link, Dan?
If you like, I'll try to troubleshoot that as we move through. So please do introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, my name is John Kinch. I'm the director of Michigan Energy Options. We're a clean energy nonprofit that's been around for about 42 years in the state of Michigan. We have a number of offices around the state: East Lansing, Marquette, and Grand Rapids. We do work projects and programs, essentially. We're not so much a policy shop. We're really about trying to work with private entities and governments and others to make projects happen, both on the energy efficiency front. But increasingly, we're doing more solar work, and we're also increasingly paying more attention to climate change in terms of how governments, how companies, how even individuals might be able to make some climate change goals in the state of Michigan by both adopting more clean energy, but also doing other mitigation things as well. Thank you.
Thank you all three for joining us today. So I had the pleasure to see all three of you at the Climate Leadership Conference in Detroit a few weeks before the world essentially broke, back when elbow bumps were considered an appropriate social distancing strategy, and we walked away from that event, I think universally, with a pretty positive feeling about momentum, both from the private and public sectors. So to start our conversation today, can y'all share some thoughts on the pre-COVID-19 state of climate leadership? Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I mean, I think there's two sides to that coin. One very positive in my view, the other not so much. One side is on the policy side, the kind of at the global level. We're 8 months away from the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and it's not been fully operationalized. the nationally determined contribution, the NDCs, and for those of you, this Paris is different than Kyoto in that everybody's got a target. It's not the haves and the have-nots like Kyoto. But the NDCs that are on the table are far short of what we need for a 2-degree world, let alone a 1.5 world. I'll get to the good stuff in a minute. The COP in Madrid was pretty much a disaster. They didn't get anything done. The Green Climate Fund is under, so the policymakers just in general at the global level due in no small part to the lack of leadership and engagement by the U.S. and other big emitters. We're not doing well on that front. On the other side of that coin, and it's no wonder that corporates are stepping up, and we've been tracking corporate action in the lead up to Paris in 2015 and since then, and it's just been incredible the level of engagement, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is this is not a program kind of buried within companies. You're seeing senior leadership at the board, at the CEO and board level engaging. And this whole concept of corporates, existence for the sole purpose of creating shareholder value is being seriously challenged. The Business Roundtable, a group of companies, some of the largest companies in the world, released a document last year to that effect that, not only do we need to, look for profits, but we need to invest in employees, protect the environment, deal fairly and ethically with our supply chains and people, and deliver value to all. I think that's a common theme. And the NGOs and the NGO community is aligning with the corporate world to really support those actions and basically provide further incentive for kind of moving this agenda along. I mean, finally, the last big meeting, the World Economic Forum last year, people, literally CEOs attending that, coming back with kind of new fire in their eyes. So, we're pretty optimistic, going into the COVID era. It was reflected in our business. We deal with kind of more of the bleeding edge of climate action, and our business has been, we've been extremely busy, and have thankfully, knock on wood, remained so even into this era. So.
Yeah, I think I don't know if you want me to jump in on that, Dan, but
Please do.
I think that there's the perspective on where are we as a field and leadership and momentum from when we were together in Detroit the first week of March to what it's going to feel like the first week of May is pretty dramatic. And I don't think it's all going to be bad. Some of what is hopefully going to be transforming the way that we look for leadership and expect leadership to behave. I think that Mark's point that there's been a policy gap is absolutely true. I think I came out of the Climate Leadership Conference feeling, again, another kind of wave or maybe movement towards reassurance that there is a possibility for the private sector to be doing this with despite the abdication of federal leadership, and that private sector being a collaboration of the nonprofit and for-profit community. I think that we can still look to that, and I think that we're seeing those kinds of corporate leadership actions through what Mark was talking about, Larry Fink's statement, as well, his statement that came out in January of this year, the McKinsey report on climate risk and response on physical hazards and socioeconomic impacts, which provided just a really excellent look at climate risk, not as something that is just a progressive risk, but really calling out specific tipping points for health, the economy, food supply, and I think that those resources are going to still be relevant and still going to stand. And I would say that in the beginning of this year, where I was seeing a lot of positive movement was with more corporations thinking about disclosure, and not just disclosure from disclosing what might happen to their bottom line through having to mitigate, but actually thinking about physical risk. We're beginning to see that corporate community come into alignment with where municipalities and local governments have been working on for a bit longer. And I would say my perspective is pretty limited to the US domestic, maybe North America. And I think that there's a likely chance that as we move through the COVID-19 era, the financial markets are still going to demand that disclosure is taking place. We saw in 2019, Moody's acquired 427, a climate services firm, which was really putting teeth behind something that they had been saying, which was that they're going to begin assessing bond ratings for municipalities based on their climate risk. And now they have the tools and the infrastructure in-house to be doing that. So I think that that coordination that was happening already between the private sector and where disclosure is being sought in the public sector is something we can still be looking toward. And I think that we'll still see the same forces pushing for that to come forward. I just want to note, the leadership abdication is really, it's an issue, and it's one that I think as we try to go into this conversation today and beyond this of how do we learn from COVID-19 and climate change, we really see the importance of leaders and leadership in the COVID-19 response, and it's something that is just terribly missing. As of June of 2019, the Office of Science Technology program, which really supports smart science and technology decision-making for the executive branch, had lost about 85% of their posts, or 85% of their scientific posts were vacant. And those vacancies are going to continue to hinder our ability to really see strong federal and smart leadership on climate and on other responses too.
Thank you, John. And John, thank you for joining us via video now.
Thanks. Sorry for the technical issues.
No worries.
Beth was just saying, made me think about what's going on right now regarding the White House to some extent and our governors around the country and where the power lies to deal with COVID-19. And the leadership conference that all of us were at a few weeks ago, which was the U.S. Climate Alliance. That Climate Alliance is a number of states that have chosen to pursue climate goals per Paris, whether or not the United States government is doing that themselves. And so I think, to underscore what Beth was saying, leadership at the state level is especially important when it comes to climate change, and it's especially important as well at the municipal level. And we spend our time, Michigan Energy Options, in both of those buckets quite a bit. And I have to say that from that conference we attended, I was encouraged by just some of the innovative public-private programs and projects that are in place, and got some good ideas, I think, to bring back to Michigan. Now, the question is going to be, I think, obviously, is what kind of economic recovery we're going to have, and is climate change going to be the center of that recovery, not something which might be regarded as good to have, but not essential as we rebound from COVID. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's going to be the tension.
Now, we kicked off this series earlier in the month with a discussion about the so-called silver lining of coronavirus. And I think if there was one area in which we could say that, it's how the pandemic has created the template of sorts for what an aggressive climate intervention might look like, and also highlighted some of the risks that we face if we don't start taking preventative measures now. So let's start with a broader question and then drill down from there. What are some of your initial takeaways about how the pandemic can inform climate action moving forward?
So I think that there's a lot of comparisons that are trying to be made. I think that maybe some people cope by writing blogs is all I can come up with, because I have somebody who's been collecting all the blogs trying to compare climate and COVID, and it's 100 pages long of just the collection of resources, right? But I think that this question of what do we learn, so my work at ASAP is to support our members, but one of my main jobs is to really understand how our theory of change and our systems change, which is field building, can evolve, and how do we assess a field. And so when I'm looking at COVID-19, I'm not focusing so much on COVID-19, but rather what is it that's allowing for a response to take place. And I see a really robust public health field that has the pillars of an effective field, which when I say those pillars, I'm talking about that it has people that are in place as leaders, communities, and networks. It has practice, so there's best practices that are known that can be deployed. There's a purpose and a message that's being deployed and being shared, out consistently, and that you have these foundational pillars of policy and funding that are coming to play. And when the whole public health field works together, and I'm seeing something that I think is so important, and I would say it's very important for me as somebody who's leading climate adaptation and resilience, is that I'm seeing public health in prevention and treatment being hand in hand. And this is something that I think we continue to struggle with in the climate field, is asking, should it be mitigation or adaptation? And we have this seeming inability to just decide we're going to, pat our head and rub our belly at the same time because we have to. I don't hear anybody out there saying that we're not going to produce ventilators until we have full testing. Like, it's both. It's a prevention and it's a treatment. And so I'm really interested in seeing how has the public health field been able to evolve and fill those spaces so effectively, Tony Fauci and the, flattening the curve. And I think that those are important lessons for us to learn. And I'll go a little further and then I'll let these other gentlemen speak. But I also think that we're seeing a really truncated time frame from the time that this pandemic was identified, and the way in which having people and networks in place were able to influence policy and funding before you started getting the kind of backlash that climate change already experiences and that hinders our progress. Because that kind of anti-science, anti-progress, anti-government rulings is so strong suddenly. And so they were able to seize a window of opportunity that kind of came open when they already had a field built. So there's lessons here, but we have to really take them apart and see which ones we can apply for climate change and which ones, maybe aren't going to be a one-to-one. It's something I'm really excited to do and to work on, obviously. Yeah, I'll leave it at that to share. I was lucky enough to have a few conversations with board members and members leading up to this call. So there's some other ideas kind of jingling around that I'll throw out there, but I'll hand it over to Mark and John and your reactions.
Yeah, great. I'll jump in. And first of all, my friend Carlos here has been looking forward to this webinar all week. So he's joined here on the couch. Awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think looking at it from a corporate, I mean, Beth, I totally agree. We're looking at kind of behaviors and processes that we're experiencing for the first time, collective action, and there's a lot we can learn from that. I think looking at it from a more kind of a tactical perspective from the corporate level, first of all, footprints are going to be down. We deal a lot, for example, in professional services where, companies who have models where they put 3/4 of their workforce on an airplane every Monday morning. I mean, and that none of that is happening. So we think partially that creates an opportunity, that creates focus. We're seeing companies already talking about, restarting their business and their approach in a different way, taking what they've learned. They've been able to, I mean, obviously it's been extreme, but when we come back, we're not going to come back the same way. I mean, I think we're all getting very accustomed to this type of engagement, and I think that you know, you're going to see more of this type of interaction. You know, so I think that's important. I think you'll see more of an opportunity. You'll see even more new companies getting into the game, or getting more aggressive on climate action, just because they're going to have numbers, they're going to have results, and they're going to, you know, and they realize that a lot of those emissions that they're creating have costs associated with them as well. And so they're going to see this as, you know, do we, again, to my point about restarting in a different way, I think you're going to see some innovation really come out of the corporate sector in new and different ways to reduce absolute emissions.
Yeah, I'll just add something real quickly to what these good folks have said. I think you're going to see folks, I hope, have a higher trust in government, coordinated government, working together with the private sector to get things accomplished. I think people are going to, I hope, believe in experts and believe in planning and believe some of the things that in the last few years have certainly been thrown under the bus by the current administration. I think also the other thing to think about is, you know, that old notion of think global and act local. Well, you know, our global economy obviously right now is in turmoil. We're all connected to each other. We're well aware of that. A virus is a hard way to be reminded of that lesson. But I also, again, going to beat on that drum with the idea that a lot of the clean energy economy is a local economy. It's things getting built within communities. It's manufacturing. It's good jobs. It's all those kinds of things like that. And also, by the way, by pushing that economy, you're also going to have real systemic change regarding climate change. I think I've been looking at some numbers that emissions because of the COVID are down something like 6% globally, but they're going to go back up, of course, once we reopen, so to speak. But can we reopen in ways so that we aren't necessarily just going back on that same pathway to being over 2 degrees Celsius? And I think we can.
I appreciate so much that you made that point about, you know, thinking globally and acting locally. I'm sure a lot of us are experiencing you know, looking out for whether it's your, you know, local toy store or coffee shop or bar, and like figuring out how to get how do you use technology to actually create new hyper local supply chains. And I think that that's extremely exciting. You know, I'm a little embarrassed to admit, I guess, because I'm like a white middle-aged liberal woman, that like I finally joined a CSA, so I probably should have done that 10 years ago. But, you know, we weren't sure about getting like produce from the grocery store. We didn't want to have that extra exposure. And so we made this choice to join a CSA, and it feels, you know, it feels really good for us personally, for our personal safety. It also feels really good to be committing to that local economy. I know that's a big ask for a lot of people who are dealing with a lot of other financial stresses, but I think that there really is an opportunity for us to think about, what do we want? You know, we keep hearing this, you know, when the economy reopens. I also know there's a lot of people who are working their tails off right now, who feel like it might not be the economy, but their jobs sure are open. And so I think that like we need to be really thoughtful of, what is it that we want? Do we want to like just have a lot more like McDonald's and Walmart's open, or do you actually want to have, you know, for me, I live in Ypsilanti, Michigan. It's like, it's Red Rock, it's Aubrey's, it's Sidetrack. Like, I want those places to come back strong. And how do we make that happen? Oh, sorry. One last thing. Out of this, I think that the state coordination is actually a real pathway for us. Subnational coordination around climate action, when you talk about adaptation and resilience, has been a pathway that we've been looking for a long time. Climate impacts are much more regionally oriented. And so I could see that coming out of COVID-19, if you actually get some governance pacts that are occurring for a strong and adaptive reopening, that could be a great path for interstate action on climate change too.
That's a pretty good segue here. We're hearing a lot about how communities, corporations, and workers are all in quote unquote survival mode, present company included. Is it going to be more difficult to prioritize investments towards carbon neutrality or climate resilience in the near or even long term?
Yeah, I can start out on that one. You know, Dan, I think it's entirely at an entry point. It's largely dependent on the sector. You know, we have a very diverse kind of client base. You know, so for example, we have a lot of clients, you know, airlines and in the travel and hospitality industry that are absolutely devastated. I mean, you know, they're focused on financial sustainability, not losing sight of their commitments and goals, but you know, it's going to be a longer road. On the other hand, you know, we work in consumer goods, and you know, as Beth indicated, there's some people in this economy, in this world, and some businesses that are just booming and are having a hard time keeping up. And then there's, you know, that's a continuum, you know, from the devastated to kind of, you know, highly engaged. So I think what is really important, kind of going back to something that I said at the beginning about the level of commitment. You know, what we're seeing now that is different from, you know, the Great Recession in 2008-9 is that companies have gone public with their commitments. You've got the science-based targets, you've got RE100, you've got you know, carbon neutral. When you go you know, public with a carbon neutral commitment, it's really hard to kind of backtrack from that. Now you can do things to maybe cut corners around the edges, but so and I think the you know, the level of, again, CEO and kind of board level commitment that we're seeing is going to kind of, I'm optimistic that you know, once things start to turn back up, that we're going to again restart and pick up over time where we left off, and even become more even become more aggressive with the work that we're doing. So here.
From the nonprofit side, Dan, just an anecdote for you, and it kind of plays a little bit of what Mark just said. We've been developing a solar workforce training project and have got a bunch of good partners with it, and it has kind of all the right bells and whistles to it, I think, as well. And I've shopped it around recently to a couple foundations in the state, and both were interested in the idea, but both said at this point they're focusing their attentions and their, you know, their charity on COVID. And so I think that's going to be the reality probably for a while. I don't know how long. And that's why I think I really hope, if there is going to be another tranche of stimulus, that it's green infrastructure, and that our state, as well as our municipalities and others, are getting ourselves in a position so that we look shovel ready to Washington, and that we actually can get some projects going quickly. And again, I think those projects that to me seem to check the most boxes are those projects that we're doing in the state now, although some of those have been sidelined, and that's everything about putting solar and storage and smart grid and smart buildings and EV and all that kind of stuff needs to happen, and it needs to even grow. It needs to be accelerated. There's a very good model out in New York, NYSERDA, that they announced legislation earlier this month, in which they are doing just that. They're accelerating solar development on landfills brownfields and things like that. They're training up workforces in the state to do that kind of work. They're doing all those kinds of things. And of course, one of the benefits of that, of course, is going to also be to reduce greenhouse gases. So I would like to see Michigan come roaring at this in the next year or two.
I think to your question, Dan, is it going to be more difficult to prioritize investments? I think that there's an easy answer, which is yes, but I don't actually think that's a different answer than it has been all along. I think we were starting to see some more traction towards more resilience work and climate work, but this is not a new fight for those of us that have been doing it. So it's not like we were getting a ton of funding and then it all went away. The good news is this is a community that knows how to be pretty scrappy. It's also a community that knows really well how to articulate the intersection of what climate work is with other priorities for municipalities, for companies, and for organizations. And I think that that intersection is one that we're going to become even better at articulating, and it won't be because we have to, like, not just because it's what you should do, it's because this is the reality. And I know from some anecdotes that cities which had robust resilience programs feel like they are coming through this experience much better because they were prepared for an emergency situation. Because when you take, climate change adaptation, climate change resilience is holistic. It's systems thinking. It's really bringing together of experts, and it's thinking about, done well, you start with who are you most vulnerable in your community? Where are the systems already not working? How are we going to respond to those? How are we going to ensure that the most vulnerable are going to have those vulnerabilities removed from them? And I think that if you approach that work, we're going to end up finding pathways by which climate resilience work, where it should have been being done, would have saved us lives in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think, it will be perhaps unwelcome in some cases, but I don't think it should be something we shy away from making points that there's recommendations around communication, around identifying and responding to vulnerable populations, about listening to vulnerable populations, about ensuring messaging is getting out. That just hasn't been done. Jackie Patterson, who's the director of NAACP's Climate and Environmental Justice Division, I'm lucky to have her serve on my board of directors. And she said yesterday that on March 12th, she wrote a memo that was outlining what her concerns were that were going to happen. And now they're just taking that memo and they're updating it as all of her concerns are essentially being founded. And she said, if we could predict it, then we can prevent it. Is the issues that are coming up are things that we know about, they're in our system, and we can respond to them. So I say that to say that we really can find ways to prioritize our resilience work and our climate work in a future which has a kind of shifted priority. But I think the prioritization, hopefully, of people and of well-being and of health are ones that are, deeply meaningful to the climate community too. So I think that this is a path that we should feel really strong walking down together with the public health community.
So to build on that some, our organization has done a few climate adaptation projects over the years, and each time we've asked if resiliency, even in a general way, resiliency is going to start become the new sustainability, if you will. And I can't say we had found that to be the case as far as where the interest of the market has been to date. But this year, our programs have been on, not in this exact order, high water levels, emergency utility assistance, recycling supply chain disruptions, environmental racism, and now COVID-19. So do you expect businesses and organizations to start thinking differently about things like climate change, community resilience, and even placing trust in institutions and experts? Beth,
I think
initial
that
thoughts?
we're at a really early phase in addressing COVID-19. To me, this is the kind of question where it's easy as a climate practitioner to look at public health as a field and its response, and it feels very robust and it feels very effective, and you see a lot of funding and you see a lot of policy decisions getting made. And unfortunately, I don't mean to be a skeptic, but I think that the backlash is catching up with the action. And that backlash against the science, the backlash against executive orders, the stay-at-home orders. And I'm not sure like how exactly we're going to take an understanding of COVID-19, the necessary response that was put in place, and parlay that into a message of action that people are universally going to feel like they can get behind. I think that there is a real possibility that we are that if like what that big messaging is, that purpose messaging, ends up being trying to kind of put two negatives to get a positive. Like, remember COVID-19? That's when we were meeting our target emissions. Oh, like that's not the message we want. But so it's something. So Dan, unfortunately, I think that this is a really important question. And to be completely honest, it's a question that I feel least capable of really getting to an answer about. But I hope I don't know. I'm interested to hear everybody's thoughts about it and kind of entertain, like, where are the paths and what are we going to learn?
John, what about your thoughts, and maybe thinking about reframing this as far as local living economies and resilience that does not necessarily rely on, say, emergency orders and what have you.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll just focus on the energy sector because I know that somewhat. Our current energy systems, really based upon this idea of you have base load. It used to be coal plants, now they're mostly natural gas combined cycle plants, or more of those, by the way. With you're producing energy some great distance away, you're using transmission distribution grid to deliver that energy to somebody's building. So that's been the model we've had for 100 years plus. Well, one of the things that we're going to have to do as we adopt more renewable energy, and especially distributed generation, in other words, that kind of solar for the most part that's local, that's like you said, ideally built on a landfill or some brownfield or covering a parking lot with a canopy. We need a much better distribution grid than we currently have in Michigan. It is not up to snuff, and so it is one of the barriers to onboarding more renewable energy. And more renewable energy locally, combined with storage and some microgrids, smart technologies, and others, inherently has more resiliency than some power coming over great distances into the state, or even across the state itself. And as we all know, in West Michigan, it's not infrequent that we have wind and rain and snowstorms that knocks out part of the grid. And so we need to think about how we modernize our grid and how we pay for that grid. And I think that's a good problem to have, because those are, again, getting back to this idea, those are good jobs. Those are jobs where people are going to be busy for quite a bit of time. I mean, solar is predicted to be, it is the fastest growing renewable in the country. It's caught up with coal now, in the sense that there's more new solar coming online than any more coal. It hasn't caught wind quite yet. And there's a lot to build in the next several years that's going to keep people busy. And I think we need to figure out ways so that we can accelerate that. And that's in part working with utilities, but it's also local governments saying that this is a value that they want to bring to their residents, their community. They want to have more of this kind of thing locally. And how you do that is you agitate for it, you push on policy, you try to make change. And I really do hope that the mayors in the state of Michigan, and we have a lot of good leadership coming out of places like Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids and Traverse City and Detroit's getting into the game, really begin to kind of get with each other and think about how we can turn our cities into places where they can produce clean energy that's resilient and has any number of multipliers.
And I would just add to this question, you know, and take kind of an optimistic approach. I love it that we're hearing a lot from scientists. You know, one of the most disturbing things of the recent era has been, you know, kind of the war on science and you know, denial of science. So I'm pleased, very pleased that scientists are kind of front and center in this discussion. Yeah, some of them are getting knocked around a bit, but you know, I'm hoping that we, you know, this country and our economy, and you know, we owe so much to, you know, the great advances in science that we've made, and it's been discouraging. One of the more discouraging things has been, you know, this disregard for good science, and I'm just hoping that this experience we're going through is the kickstart to get the scientists and the biologists and, you know, everyone with a role to play here at the table again and in the discussion.
Thanks, Mark. And on a similar note, what is your expectation from the public sector? We've talked a lot these past few years about how we've seen momentum despite a lack of federal leadership, and part of that has been due to strong leadership from states and cities. Is how do you think this informs their efforts? Do you think this changes anything at the federal level?
Well, at minimum, I think you're seeing whether it changes anything, and it's changing the money that's flowing out right now from the, you know, at the federal level. There's a $3.2 trillion infrastructure bill being, you know, finalized right now, and it's going so fast. It's hard to keep up with the you know, the pace of the spending legislation. So ASAP is working with our partners, with you know, partner organizations, to understand what's going into that resilience, or what's going into that infrastructure bill. We've submitted comments previously to the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis on policy recommendations. Those recommendations were meant to be released in March, and they were held back. It's unclear how effectively we're informing that policy piece, but you know, so I think the federal government and agency action is likely to remain combative to climate change as long as this administration remains in place. However, the spending that's coming from the legislature is potentially a different story, and a place for us to be ensuring that there are requirements around resiliency, around smart climate action. But it's a fight, you know, because you see what happened with the PPP program, and it's a shame that the provision that was put into it to allow for hospitality companies that have multiple facilities, but no facility with more than 500 employees were allowed to apply for that program. But that was intentionally written. And so we're fighting some really big forces. And when we talk about clean energy and climate action in this infrastructure bill, we're going to be fighting some really big forces. And it's going to be a lot of money, and that's good. But I've got some concern about where it's going to fall to.
Mark, John, maybe also if you'd like to build on kind of the thoughts about stimulus investments as well.
Well, this is really more Mark's bailiwick than my own, but you know, I'm certainly wondering about what the carbon economy looks like, carbon counting. There was a piece in Foreign Affairs just the other day. It's pretty interesting about basically cap and dividend needing to be the model for our economic foreign policy, our global trading policy, essentially. And this was written by Jim Baker and George Schultz, who are a couple, obviously statesmen from a lot of experience, and suggesting that if we don't get into this game with really having greenhouse gas emissions as our economic target, that we're going to be left behind, and we're going to be in trouble. And I think that's a message that works not only on the global stage, but also more locally on the state and the city, community stage as well. Is that these investments that can be made into clean energy, whether it's manufacturing, installation, maintenance of these kinds of systems, are going to be long-term investments that have a number of paybacks. And we have to do a couple things. We need to retire coal plants and other kinds of fossil fuels more quickly than we're doing to provide for these other renewable energy to grow and to have the capacity to fill that void. And so, while the utilities have their integrated resource plans and they have their intentions of retiring this coal plant in 2030 and this one in 2035 and all the rest, it might be interesting to think about what happens if they start retiring those much more quickly, and then we really push hard on introducing more renewables to the state of Michigan, because Michigan still is regarded, in the solar industry at least, as a difficult state to do business. It shouldn't be.
Mark, and before you start, Mark, just as an FYI to all of our attendees as we move into the Q&A period after this, if you'd like to go ahead and submit any questions via the Q&A or the chat, or raise your hand if you'd like to do so via voice, you can go ahead and do so now. And sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we deal. My view to the world on this is a little bit different, because we deal mostly, in the voluntary carbon markets. It's interesting. We were just experiencing a phenomenon. I've been in this space for 12 years. A phenomena that we've never experienced, and that is for a lot of reasons. There were a lot of projects that were started that were left kind of high and dry by lack of action on the policy. So we had a real surplus and oversupply in carbon markets. So this is forestry and land use projects, clean cooking in the developing world, renewable energy. With the increase in action that I was speaking of earlier, we're finally seeing supply or demand catch up, and in some cases, especially around natural climate solutions, exceed supply. So we're just starting to see investment come into those markets. We've had some discussions, particularly around the forestry and land use sector. Could stimulus be used to kind of accelerate some of those projects? But that's still pretty high level and nothing really concrete yet.
All right, thank you so much, John. Now we have some time for questions from the attendees, and I'm going to try, if there is any interest, I'm going to try something a little different. If anyone would like to actually share a thought in the form as a form of question, you can raise your hand, and we can try to do that. But if no takers, that's great as well. So as and I think we discussed this a little bit already, but as the cry to build back better is being heard, it sounds like we have the opportunity to help people see this as building sustainability and the foundations of our rebuild as a smart path. As people concerned with helping make this happen in our context, I guess it's not really a question. We can assist by telling the stories where the sustainability has proven to be the best financial choice. So, any thoughts as how we might be able to weave storytelling better into a post COVID-19 dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I love the story that I kind of alluded to from Jennifer Gerardo in Broward County, Florida. And this is an area, the 4 counties of Florida, Southeast Florida, have been coordinating now for almost 10 years to make sure that they're using the same climate information. It began as data-driven, that they needed to have the same sea level rise information, so that they went to their policymakers at the state and at the national level. Their sea level rise projections were in concert with one another. Through that work, through what is called the Regional Climate Action Plan, the RCAP, which is now RCAP 2.0, they've been able to have an governmental policy-making body that has led resilience for those 4 counties. And now the way that the 4 counties are able to be coming through this is a testament to what holistic resilience planning looks like. I love storytelling. Well, because I don't actually do resilience and adaptation work anymore, all I do is hear other people's work. Essentially, all I do is storytelling. So I think it's great. It's also my job, so I'm biased. But I would love to help, like, that effort of kind of where are these stories too emerging in Michigan, and like that we can tell the stories of action. I think it'd be neat for us to put on kind of a mini effort to track these down and to make sure it's compelling to our state leaders.
Yeah, I would agree. This is on more of a global scale, but as we move to to more of an emphasis on the broader, more human good, I think storytelling is a key part of that. And as I noted, we've worked with hundreds of projects around the world, and if you go to how we talk about those projects, yeah, we talk about the technical stuff, but we always talk about how they impact people in communities and biodiversity and tell the story, because that's what people get excited about. So I think storytelling is absolutely front and center, and especially pertinent when it comes to climate, and because it does impact people and in so many different ways.
I just dropped a couple of resources in the chat, Dan, just so people could pick them up. One of them is a resource which was put together by Susie Mosier on transformational change and using data to drive decision making. It was made leading up to COP25. It's a really nice 3-page memo on what transformational change looks like, which I strongly believe is what we need now. The next one is from NAACP. This is the guidance that NAACP has been creating on risks and impacts and interventions that are necessary for the an equitable response and a just response to COVID-19. And then I also just dropped in a link to a tracker tool put together by Bloomberg and National League of Cities, which is now tracked 1,200 different policies that have been implemented by over almost 400 cities on COVID-19. And it can be sorted by policy action, by population impacted, and the type of action that was taken. It's a pretty amazing tool.
And we have time for one last question before we wrap up, and I don't know if it's going to be a question or a comment necessarily, but David Gard of MICA, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to talk right now.
Hi, Dan. Is there something specific you'd like me to address?
No, you just raised your hand. I thought you wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a technical glitch. My apologies.
All right, sure.
I misfired.
Well, you
great panel though. Really good discussion today. So
all right,
thanks
David.
Everybody.
Thank you, David.
Well, at least we got to try it and see if it worked.
It worked.
Mark, John, Beth, I want to thank you again for taking time to participate in our panel. As I mentioned, all of these, if this would have been one of our live forums, I'd be handing you a 4-pack of beer right now as a speaker gift, and I guess we'll just have to owe you one. But I guess I can send you a nice postcard at some point. But thanks again. This is a great talk for all of our attendees here. hope you have a chance to check out some of the resources for you later, or in the chat, and that we see you again next week. Please do please do fill out the feedback for when you see that, and if you have any further thoughts, please feel free to reach out to myself or any of our panelists. So that's it for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.